Our last speaker, and certainly not our least, is the Secretary General of Iscarsah, Tom Morrison. Tom is a father of 5, and with any time he has left, he tries to run an engineering office in Fredericton, New Brunswick. Stay up here after you talk.
Okay. Thank you, Steve. So I don't know about everyone else, but that was a lot to take in from the last few hours. And I'm reminded of how many things I don't actually know. Before I start my presentation, I want to take one aside. Is everyone ready? Okay. I don't know if I'm ready, but I'm going to try. So, before I start my presentation, I'm going to tell you the point. But I'm going to ask for your help to amuse myself. So, the point of my presentation is that the Iscarsah Principles are... Oh, we got a few words, what? Shout out. I could accept many things. We could say the Iscarsah Principles are practical. Essential. Ooh, I was going to go with wonderful because I find it has a nice feel. Any? True? Oh, true is a good one. I like wonderful because I make my kids say molasses is wonderful when they first rejected it. So how about that? We'll try this again. The Iscarsah Principles are important. We have to get all together. Okay, important, we're going to go for it. The Iscarsah Principles are? Now, just for the record, I may be making you awkward. What's the Romanian word for awkward? Jodat. So I may be making you jodat. I've got like 10,000 plus hours of feeling that way, so I'm okay. We can work on it. Your heart rate goes up, so one more time. We're going to go with important. The Iscarsah Principles are? I've got 5 kids and they're louder than this room is right now. So one more time. The Iscarsah, we'll go right up with Paulo. The Iscarsah Principles are?
Amazing.
Amazing, okay. Oh, we got an awkward. Well, we'll work from there. So I decided early on to focus a bit differently than many of the other presentations. None of my buildings are nationally historic sites. They are definitely not internationally historic sites or important or recognized. They are very important for the people who work on them. And many of them, the idea that they could be demolished is on my clients' minds. For the most part, they're hoping to keep roofs over their heads. They want to keep their doors open for what they're doing. They've occasionally been refused help by other professionals. They have been told prices are so crazy that they can't actually manage it. Whereas when I walked by this building just about a month ago with my 4-year-old, I had to take a picture because like any engineer, I like to see stuff broken. I mean, that's fun and great. But eventually it's just kind of wasteful, right? Like it's lazy, mentally lazy to get rid of demolished buildings. In Canada, at least, we have a housing crisis. In Fredericton, the rent has almost doubled in a decade for people renting spaces, and they're demolishing apartment buildings. I mean, it's kind of stupid. So there's a number of reasons it just strikes me odd how the whole construction industry that I see in Canada ends up dealing with these sites. And the Iscarsah Principles, because they are, oh, come on, very important. We'll go with very important. The Iscarsah Principles, because they're very important, help give this guide for how to start addressing the buildings. So you can hang out with me for a few minutes and we'll talk about a few of the principles that I thought would be fun to talk about. One of my favorite is the Principle 1.6. I mean, there's maybe 30 favorite ones, but Principle 1.6 where we've got a medical analogy. And this fills in so much of the different aspects, everything from the fact that if you go see a doctor, they treat you as an individual. If I went to see a doctor and they told me, oh, well, you're not how you should be, I would be in a lot of trouble because I don't think I'm quite normal, but maybe that's just me. This idea that if there's a patient, they need to be treated as individual. You need to understand the background for it. You need to figure out how to step through to the diagnostic, the treatment, and the steps from there. So let's quickly reflect on a few of them. This is the same church that I was hanging out by before. We're talking about case history and what the background kind of tells us. These are two pictures of the same face of the church. The only difference is this is a picture from 2007 that we found the drawings showing the areas that they had done, quote unquote, extensive masonry repairs to. And this is a sketch that we marked up from their drawing to show where their damage was in 2018. So if we know that they repaired all of that, and then it's damaged like that, that kind of changes what we're expecting. Fortunately, because the Iscarsah Principles are very important. Because the Iscarsah Principles are very important, they provide us with some guidelines about how we can start stepping through this to say, do we understand the causes? I'm not going to go into a lot of detail because we've covered that. 2, early assessments on this, and I'll fill these pictures in a moment. Early assessments on this building is it was kind of cracking open and the tower was going to come down on their heads, and generally that's not good when you're running a church that does outreach to at-risk communities. So we needed to figure out what to do. They had minimal resources. They do outreach for homeless people, and they have a very small group of parishioners. They also do English second languages, and they don't have access to public money. So they took a leap of faith, and when we said we can start monitoring this to see if we can control that risk, they said, okay. So we're using a monitoring system. There were more sensors than just those, but those are the ones I'm showing, core of it, biaxial tilt sensor, something for the weather. And that was all well and good to help us know if there's any problem until we've got, the tilt moving back and forth through 2019, 2020, 2021, then late 2021, suddenly it moves a lot. So we're, a little over 4 degrees movement in one of the walls where that tilt sensor was. So where's the tilt sensor? Well, there I am hanging outside the church. I think it was probably a few months prior to this. And that's where that tilt sensor is, of course, on the inside of the tower. So it was kind of alarming. Once you start seeing things, sometimes like a doctor, there is emergency medicine, and then there's the long term, right? Sometimes we don't have the option to plan the long term, but we just have to act. And the multidisciplinary team, or the interdisciplinary team, also Iscarsah Principles, because the Iscarsah Principles are
very important.
Very important. Okay, this is the one we're going for, or we can work with that. The Iscarsah Principles are very important. We worked with the Mason. There aren't a lot of real craftsmen left. It is a dying group in Canada. We're trying hard to support them. I was fortunately able to work with Brian Frost here, who hates having his picture taken, but we had a few, usually at the back of his head. And we came up with a design that he could install to work with to just kind of drill a hole in so he can gauge the outside and the inside wife. And if we come back, it continued to show that. We've got more data still, but it stabilized that. Worst case stuff as we got the money to deal with the bigger problems, because even in the world of medicine, there's emergency things that come up. Sometimes you need more testing. This is, I always mix up the letters in his first and last name, Ove Arup. This is an Ove Arup bridge in Newfoundland. He is quoted as having 2 structures he really liked, the Sydney Opera House and this bridge, and no one knows about it, and it was overgrown, and it's really gorgeous, but that happens. It had some problems like that. We also saw symptoms that suggested various AAR mechanisms, or the alkali aggregate reactions, as a SR alkali silica reaction. We had it. So like any medical system, sometimes you do need to do diagnostic testing. Sometimes you don't. You need to make sure it's matching what you need. We could go further on that, but we're going to step aside now and just touch on another one of the principles, because the Iscarsah Principles are spectacular. Ooh, I like this. Spectacular. That was a good one to go with. Everyone's regretting sitting in the front row now. Sorry about that. So Principle 2.5, matching data sets. That's my short little interpretation. That the diagnosis is based on historical, qualitative, and quantitative approaches. One, when we go, we're lucky, we work on stuff that exists, so we have one data set immediately. Oh, look at this, it's, not on my head. That is a data set, that is valid, that can't be ignored. It's not the only data set. And then there's the qualitative and quantitative, as we understand, look at damages, figure out what's happening. This would be one of the classic cases of the stakeholder saying, oh, this is not safe, I've got this stone stairwell that cantilevers out of the wall. You get into this door, you can get into how it's designed. We have some guides from the late 1800s outlining how to build this. You see how it's kind of a helical setup that keeps the stone in compression and that outside portion. You see how it works. You can derive from that what is a appropriate quantitative measure, and you've got the qualitative to match it up. So a lot of this builds the argument for it. Fun side fact on this one is there's even a historic load test that was documented. It's in an old courthouse, and a judge, the judges used this stair, wasn't comfortable, so he got the neighboring prison to bring over a bunch of prisoners and test the stair to make sure it was safe for them. Again, on record, so more valid data. Now here's going to switch over to another one that I find amusing, because we often get that challenge of how do we find the quantitative data, how do we find like that non-biased number to help make sense of what we already see or what we know historically. Whereas this was a fun one, that this building was part of a set of buildings, and we'd been told that we should focus on the rest of the set of buildings. This building, they'd just done a bunch of work, it was all freshly painted, there were no concerns. But it was odd, because qualitatively, when I was looking around, and it's not great how it shows, but you can see that rafter as it comes down, it was split and breaking open. I mean, historic wood does check when it dries, but patterns are interesting. And when you're seeing the same damage in the same location in 2/3 of the rafters along one roof, you start saying, why is that happening? And then, of course, I'm not supposed to look at this building, and they thought I was crazy most of the time. But I go around to map out where else there's damage. And I should also mention, like, qualitatively, you look in the split, and the wood is, nice and bright, like it's freshly cut, despite the fact it's 200 years old. You say, okay, this is interesting. Let me entertain myself a bit by looking into it further. And you start seeing more damage patterns in different interior posts. It puts one foundation wall that was spliced in a different context of saying, okay, now this is getting more interesting than just one of the walls has a whole bunch of repairs. And once we get around and look in, the picture is old camera, but I get in to see one of the braces they had put in at some point, and it was lovely to see they'd taken 2 pieces of lumber, and instead of having continuous brace, they just nailed it into one of the posts partway through, which isn't known for being an overly rigid solution. We're still puzzled. I'm going to quickly go through the story, but eventually we found out that, oh yeah, when they painted, some of the boards were rotten, and then they took off the boards and they discovered some of the posts were rotten. But it's okay, because they cut out the wood and they put in new lumber, and they had an engineer look at it, and it was all designed, and it was great. Someone had designed it. That was wonderful. We eventually got access to the other engineer's designs, because we can't see it, and we found that they had designed it as a stud wall, whereas most of that building is a frame, right? So everything's under flexure. It's being bent, not just pushed down upon. And so then we could start doing bounding analysis. And there's another Iscarsah principle, because the Iscarsah principles are useful. I like that. The Iscarsah principles are useful. There's another Iscarsah principle that talks about just using general analysis. So we did a bounding analysis. I don't know the exact details on it. I don't know the exact material properties on it. They weren't going to give me that kind of money yet. So we just said, okay, let's look at different connection issues. Let's look at what this frame acts like when they've compromised those and they can no longer take flexure. And what does this frame look like if those are working not compromised and can't take flexure? And it's entirely different. No surprise there. and now we're able to align how the historic data, the qualitative data, the quantitative data all works out. Just because this is another amusing one on how the back and forth can go, sometimes the more you know about numbers, the easier it is to lie with them. The same is true about the more you know about numbers, the more you start saying, hey, here's where my key data is. This was a funny building. I'm just going to take a second on it. And where we had an odd damage pattern just on one face, just in one area. It was a combination of a whole bunch of different factors, and we were trying to figure out why it happened. We happened to be working with an engineer who had a bunch of expertise in ice. In Canada, there are engineers that have expertise in ice because it's Canada. And one of the questions he said is like, well, have you considered the Lubin factor? Ooh, I may have gotten the word wrong. It was an entirely new word to me. In ice, there is a word to describe the fact that different surfaces absorb temperature from the sun at different rates. Right? So the same reason a cat on a sunny day will lie out on a driveway or a sidewalk, but not the grass. They warm up differently, changes things. So when you have these long bands that were solid concrete and a glossy brick between, the thermal impacts are different. You got a whole bunch of other things that were not done right in the building, and we're getting a case which we then were getting one of our partners to run the final models on, showing that the thermal expansion of the giant concrete was actually creating a compressive zone that was the worst case in those regions. So sometimes it's fun playing that little game of how to get it. Everyone else having fun with the idea? Maybe? Perhaps too fast. But it's okay. The Iscarsah Principles are?
We should respect them, as I didn't read them, but I trust to Mrs. Görün Arun.
Ah, it's the right person to trust. Okay, so just moving along, I've got the one last one I'll do, and then I will stop talking for you. Principle 1.7, no action should be undertaken without having ascertained the achievable benefit and harm. Benefit and harm. Everything we do has benefit and harm. That's life. That's very clear to me when I've got 5 kids and I'm trying to figure out how to discipline one. This was interesting because this is early on in our project. Now, most of my clients, we tried to convince them that we can help them. And our first project to help them, I typically have less than a week of time to go to the site, try to get my head wrapped around a building, try to figure out some initial evaluation as required to support myself, and then create a document that can convey that to both the direct client and to often boards and committees and what have you. That's not to do everything, but that first step so they have something to say, hey, this could actually help us, I have about a week. So this would have been going through this is the top of a tower in a cathedral, and trying to be like, okay, well, this is odd. There's a whole steel structure, there's concrete in behind, there's a different age concrete on the floor. Then we've got the large base of the timber spire that goes up above the tower. And that the steel structure, you see the columns and the bracing, you sit there thinking, okay, what's that for? Or as the kids nowadays say, WTF. They go through to think about it and say, okay, I think the other engineer thought that would take all the load from the spire. And we get into modeling, and modeling, yes, we can do stuff that has pretty pictures. They're amusing. And we can show both with that, with the ambient vibration work we did and all, eventually confirm the suspicion. But in that first week, I couldn't do this. That would take me more than a week, definitely. But in the first bit, to go through and say, is this a problem and is that part of the issue? There are tie rods in it that were loose. You could take them and shake them. And sure enough, later we find, yes, the steel doesn't do anything. The steel was never well engaged into the building. And so what is the benefit of what's going in, what's the harm? Sometimes we're trying to make sense of other people's stuff, and sometimes we probably make mistakes. Engineers are very good at being safe, but I can't say I'm perfect. Oh yes, and my quick honorable mentions. I was going to read these all off, but I won't worry about it. Again, multidisciplinary, huge. Like our ability to work with top-level craftsmen makes a world of difference, so that's why Brian got featured again. As I said, he tries to get out of pictures quickly if I have a camera. The value beyond aesthetic, I mean, that's been touched on by a few groups. The starting approximately. I find most of my projects, I can't get into detail. I need an idea of the direction, and that approximate analysis is really important, phrased differently. Finding the root causes, demonstrating the things are actually needed before we do it, and again, these are my rephrasing of it, and that perfection is silly, right? Like how many people do you sit and be like, oh, I need to change all of this because this wall isn't, perfectly plumb. It's like, does it have to be? Why is that request there? And it's always fun to argue with your client because they're the one that's supposed to pay you when you invoice them later. So hey, lots of fun things to figure out. And I haven't lost my entire check. Mulmiski? No, that was close. Molmoski? No. Mulțumesc. Mulțumesc. Sorry, mulțumesc. Oh.
Okay, we have a second microphone here. Let's see if we can get some question and answer period going. Okay.
Oh, I guess I'm still supposed to be involved with that too, eh?
Yes.